Hi, everyone. Welcome to Two Bald Guys Talking Safety. I'm Langdon DeMint.
And I'm Julian Taylor.
And welcome to our podcast. Welcome back, everyone, to Two Bald Guys Talking Safety. I'm Langdon DeMint and here with my dear friend, Jules. How's it going, buddy?
It's good. It's good to see you, Langdon. I'm just sitting here trying to get my head around the fact that 2022 seems to have just disappeared on us.
It really has. We're embracing now our holiday season, the end of the year. There's a lot of joy, and then it kind of drops off. Not drops off, but isn't it funny how you do your holiday thing? For us, we do our Christmas thing with the girls, go that, and then right after
it's
like,
January.
Man, it's basically the week between and like New Year's. You're like, what is this? Yeah. It's kind of a.
No, I like the week between sort of Christmas and New Year. Yeah. There's lots happening. See family, see friends, do lots of things. But January,
January's a tough month.
Yeah.
On the last podcast, I think hopefully everyone has had the opportunity to listen now, or if you haven't, please check in. We've talked trends as we were coming to the close of the year.
No. We didn't.
Was that not trends?
No, we talked tips. We don't do
tips.
trends. We don't do trends, Langdon.
Trends. Yes,
everybody does trends. We do tips.
Good call. That was the difference. And we actually focus on that exact verbiage. So our trends are actually tips, users. So understand the difference. Tips, not to be confused with trends.
Top tips even. You could call them top tips.
Yes, we did do that. Good call. Yeah. Good catch.
Okay.
But we have kind of transitioned back. We're going to talk a little overarching on a big, crucial element that's alive in all of our workplaces. Risk. Risk are inherent everywhere, everyone. We talked, I might even let you kind of paint the picture for the chocolate teapots, because that was your baby, how we've talked about that. And trying to think, the transition. So what do you think?
Well, you know me. I like an analogy, and it's not an easy word to say, but I do like one. And we've talked about chocolate teapots, haven't we? And that's that great British phrase that really says, whatever you're doing, it's as useful as a chocolate teapot. In other words, if it's not as useful, it's not useful. So don't do it. Yeah. So let's focus on good things to do and positive things to do. My analogy today includes chickens and eggs. And I don't know whether you use this analogy. You use that one. Okay.
Yes.
So do we put the egg before the chicken or the chicken before the egg? Okay. And really the reason for thinking about that particular analogy is where's your focus? Where's our focus as health and safety professionals? And really, it comes from lots and lots and lots of conversations where we go and talk to organisations, and we go and talk to safety people, and the first thing they want to talk to us about is incident management or incidents. Yeah, and it really strikes us that we're putting the egg before the chicken in that case, doesn't it? Yep. That as a health and safety professional, where should your focus lie first and foremost? And actually, it's that prevention of incidents, isn't it? And prevention of incidents comes through hazard and risk management.
I think it's an interesting, and we talk about it regularly and think about how we can shift that thinking more so. And maybe this is really going kind of off kilter slightly. Maybe I don't know how you do it ultimately, because
I'm worrying about where this. I'm just worrying about where this is going to go. But, yeah,
you'll see. I don't know how we do it from the standpoint of and I kind of think it's a little bit of human nature, right? If you think about it, you have the most experience or the most knowledge, so to speak, of things that you have been a part of, meaning things that have happened to you, which makes sense why, when you think about it from that perspective, plus the avenue of, from a regulatory perspective, which you and I have talked about. We know if you're in any country like the US or UK or anywhere with very proactive regulatory bodies, you have this. So we see that. We know that that's what they track. It's easy to see an incident happen, OSHA's coming out, or an incident happened, we need to investigate, or whatever, because that's where all the data is. That's where everything, we know that stuff has happened. So when you start shifting, trying to think how can we be more ahead of the curve, that is difficult. It's a difficult because you're changing the way people are thinking, which to me it works perfect, because then we have all this history, we have all this insight of knowing where things have happened, which is great. Keep that. So it's just like a tick, just a little switch. How can we then think more proactively to looking at general risk so we can understand why did those things happen, and then how can we ensure that they don't happen moving forward? So see, I wasn't going too far off. It was just kind of thinking, they do. Everyone always focuses on the incidents, and maybe it's because it's easier to focus on those because they're, you know what I mean?
You did trigger a thought there, though, which doesn't happen very often, but you did trigger a thought
regularly
there, Langdon, which was actually, and I'm thinking aloud here, so bear with me, which was really something around the fact that sometimes our most experienced people are probably our most dangerous people. And for those of you watching on YouTube, I'm making the inverted commas signal with my hands, in that we get that complacency, don't we? We get that, I've done this job for a long time, I know how to do it, and they don't necessarily have safety at the front of mind when they're doing their particular job role. And I think this sort of comes into one of the key things that we're banging a drum about, which is the whole move away from talking about safety culture and actually talking about safe operations, and actually making safe operations a mantra within your organization. Because when you stop and think about safe operations, it's not about trying to talk about safety as this separate thing that you need to think about. It's just an integrated part of what you do. So actually, everybody who's involved, say on a production line, sort of the daily shift will talk about safety as a part of the daily sort of shift briefing. Yeah. When you go to do startup, safety will be a part of that startup procedure. The safety checklist will be part of it. Yeah. People will have read a risk assessment before they, or a method statement before they start doing something. And actually that includes everybody. So whether they're new to the role or experienced in the role, we make it a way of life that we talk about safety as a part of what we do. And that's absolutely something that we want to keep promoting and talking about next year in 2023, isn't it? Is talking about, right, how can we make safe operations a reality? But I suppose for today's podcast, what it means is risk management actually comes first. Risk management is the first thing we talk about, not incidents. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think it is that, we've talked about it before, that kind of maturity, if you will, or that shift of how everywhere, if you think back in the early 1900s, I mean, we can go further back, but let's just focus on the early 1900s. It was the Wild West, so to speak, of, if you're familiar with the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, I mean, that's what kind of led to the creation of the ASSP. And you think about that was a factory where they basically locked the doors to make sure people were working. Building caught on fire, what happened? I mean, a lot of things. So you think about that. That's, for the most part, that's the Wild West. It went from that to compliance. We started having regulatory. Then it started becoming more risk management and thinking. And I think we're still in that mindset of risk management, and hopefully transitioning more to even, learning more proactive management that includes all those things. And it is because if we can start really looking and thinking of where do risks exist, and risk is a broad, I mean, what we manage risk here versus when I was working as a risk services consultant with insurance, I mean, it's a lot broader. But I think you bring up a good point. Health and safety, if it's really integrated throughout, So it's just discussed in all elements. Everyone knows if a new process is being developed, how can we design it? How can safety be even designed from the onset of that? If they're creating a new line, let's make sure we're putting everything first. And then it kind of starts to breed throughout. And I think that's what we see. Organizations that are doing that, they understand that it's really a lot more ingrained. Um, I have a friend that works at a very large healthcare clinic and hospital here in the United States. And whenever they're adding new lines, if they're doing new builds or anything, a safety member attends that with everyone. It could be a safety member there with the doctor, with a engineer, with an architect. I mean, it doesn't matter. Safety is ingrained, and to me, that is the type of organization that they understand why does it matter, and it ultimately it comes back to that safe operations. What you said a moment ago, not to make any seasoned veterans of employees upset, but it complacency sets in. On the flip side, we also see it where the new workers that come in, they get so focused on certain serious hazards, they might overlook others also. So we don't know where the actual what's the right where the money lies in the job. How do you have someone that is the most detailed? Are they a little longer or shorter? But I think it goes to show that no matter where they are on their journey of working, you have to be cognizant and understand the importance of what you're doing. And the more focused we can be on risk preventative, I think we start seeing there can be a positive change here. So it's not just always, doing the job to the way we see fit. And then if something happens, it happens. If it doesn't, great.
Yeah. And that I love that kind of that what you talked about there, which is in the UK we've got a set of construction regulations called CDM, and actually that talks about a responsibility when we're designing. How do we design something so that it's safe, both in terms of actually physically constructing it, but then running it and maintaining it post sort of go live, if you like. And I think that's a great principle, isn't it? It's risk management, isn't it? It's part of risk management is doing it at the design stage. So if you create a production line, for example, it's not just thinking about how do we create that production line so it's safe to use. It's also thinking about other things that need to happen. So, for example, do we have a cleaning or a cleaning process or a shutdown process? How do we do that safely? Yeah. Another point I know we thought about before is this question of is it hazard or risk, and I think part of me is getting to a point of saying don't get too tied up in the semantics here, and but yeah, I mean that the hazard is the thing, and then risk is how much or sort of how yeah. So I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer, but the right answer is actually hazards and risks should be the front of mind and the priority in the hope that we can then prevent things from happening in the first place. Yeah. So we actually want to proactively stop incidents from happening. And I suppose getting people within any organization to walk around with their eyes wide open, which sounds a bit patronizing, but it's almost that there's almost an unconsciousness, isn't there? If we've not promoted this and got people thinking about it, there's an unconsciousness that actually they walk around and don't see the hazards. Yeah.
Sorry, right quick. That is one of my favorite activities. And I know you and I've done them in workshops over the last 10 years. I would say I have done so many workshops, and one of them was a JHA. It was like I did an all day JHA creation, did a 4-hour workshops and such, and that's always just the most crucial and fun activity is because you have some where people think about it, and then sometimes there's certain things. Oh, I've never thought about it. I don't remember. There was one I had an example when I was showing, and it was in the last year, and I wish I remembered what it was. It was about a year ago. Somebody brought up something on an image that I had not thought about in maybe 8 years, if I'd even thought about it at all. And it was one of those, I was just, light bulb, like I've looked at this. I have come up with, in one picture, like 15 different hazards. And it's not even, it's not an image that you would necessarily think that there were that many, but they came up with another one. And I was like, it was a fresh set of eyes, which usually that entails, but it just shows how everyone kind of slightly will think differently on what they're seeing. And that's the good thing about opening your eyes to what you're saying. I think it helps others to maybe see something that the majority haven't seen.
Yeah.
And that's what it's
I'm
about.
gonna come on to that in a moment, but just before I do, can I just say, for anybody who's listening to this, you need to go and watch the podcast, the YouTube version, because I'm getting slightly distracted because I can see a windmill going round behind Langdon's shoulder, because he's got a nice little wintry model village sitting behind him, and I could just see this windmill rotating on your right shoulder or left
That's the
shoulder.
pancake house, Jules.
Very good.
It's the pancake house, the Dutchman's pancake house.
Very nice. Anyway, back to business. I suppose that kind of takes us to another interesting point, doesn't it? Because you do that exercise with people, and you get them to point out what the hazards are, and we've all done those kind of cartoony exercises, and some of it might seem blindingly obvious. It might seem like, again, I'm going to use the sort of speech marks and say common sense. But what is common sense? Yeah. For example, Langdon, to you, would it be common sense not to put your hand into a moving machine?
Yeah, should be.
Yeah. Okay.
Should be.
Is that common sense for everybody?
No.
Yeah, and I'm actually thinking back to a real life example here, which is when I was laying a patio, and I got a guy, and he's great. He does a great job. Guy called Tony, who came and he was laying the patio for me. And he said, "Right, Jules," he said, you can be my mixer." So I was mixing the cement. So we got the cement mixer. It's there. It's going round, and I'm shoveling in the sand and the cement and putting the water in. And for an office jockey like me, it was absolutely killing me. It was seriously hard work. But then every so often, Tony would come out and just check the quality of my mixes to make sure they were good. And he'd quite happily get a stick, shove his hand into this moving cement mixer to just give it a stir. Yeah. And again, it's a perfect example of that what's common sense, but also because he's done the job for so long, he just does things without thinking about it. Yeah. And okay, he gets away with it. But again, any kind of piece of moving machinery, what could the outcome be? Yeah.
Well, touching something hot. I mean, how many times I know you have, I know I have as a child. I mean, I have older when I was, I've talked about treehouse, or if I'm building something, when I've cut it, using the circular saw, and as soon as I've gone through something, I know it's going to be a little hot because I've just cut it also. And there've been times, oh, why is that little piece sticking up? And you burn your finger. And
well, you're making me laugh because I'm just thinking of the number of times that you say things to your kids, don't you? So don't touch it because it's hot. Don't touch the wet paint. And what do they automatically have to do? It's like the big finger coming out, isn't it? So, but again, I suppose the key point here is what we're saying is how do you get people to see the stuff that's in front of them? And I think you make a really good point, and I think something to take away from this is that sort of working with groups, working with people to talk about what a hazard is, but also again, and we've talked about this so many times, but it's so important is what's the value to you as an individual to actually go around and consciously look for those things? What's the value to you in terms of your long-term health and the long-term health of the people working around you? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think, how do you make it? I think to what you just said, that's a really good point, because it's not even just how do you make it so people see that, but it's also how do you make it so, like what I was talking about, touching that hot area, what you were talking about, him putting his hand in there. How do we make it to where they spot the hazard? They know there is inherent risk there. But how do we make it to where even though they understand there's an inherent risk, and even though they have done it maybe for 10, 20, 30 years, or maybe they're new to it and they realize there's nothing too serious that's going to happen here, quick little, but how can we make them realize that maybe I shouldn't do that anyways, even though I know the adverse effect is probably pretty minimal. Why do I not want to do that? And maybe it is thinking about the extreme. Well, what could happen? Whatever. It's that second thought of just maybe having that thought so we can understand the importance of why we don't want to do it. You know?
I suppose part of that as well is giving people the confidence to tell the people that they're working with don't do it, isn't it? And I'm just reflecting back, and this is a while ago. I used to work in a big distribution center, and I used to work on the office side of the wall. And if you went into the actual warehouse piece of the building, you had to wear high vis. So even though it's broad daylight and everybody can see, you had to wear high vis because it was kind of that high vis era where everybody just wore high vis for the sake of wearing high vis. And I can remember going in one day, and I was just thinking about what I was doing. I wasn't thinking about high vis. And I walked in without high vis on, and Rich Brown, who was one of the sort of foremen, yelled across the warehouse at me, "Julian, get your high vis on." And it's just sort of reflecting on that. You think, okay, how does that encourage me that there's a value to wearing high vis, or is it just this is just a rule that we all have to follow here, and we don't really understand why? So I think that why do we the importance of why shouldn't be underestimated in terms of actually educating people in terms of, okay, so we're going to ask you all to wear high vis. What's the value to wearing high vis in that particular situation? Yeah. What's the value to doing it? Yeah.
Yep. Well, and that's it. We know that putting high vis on, that's, probably, I'm assuming that was very much a culture thing. And that's good. I think a lot of times it is, and if that's an added piece of buffer protection, whatever you want to call it, hey, that's great. But it's that thought of, we know things are there. We know risks exist. We know there are probably certain hazards that are going to exist. And then is the risk going to occur? Is it not? I don't know. But how can we actually reduce those? How can we think about, just what we said, when we know that they're there, when we know that hazard is present, how can we ensure that what we're doing is not just reducing it to an acceptable level, or not just knowing where I can cut a corner and I know I'm going to be fine, but how can we do it to actually being safe, and when I do the job, nothing is going to happen? And I think that's where we start needing to shift of that thought of, how can I, one, be aware? How can I, two, although I am aware, understand what, not my own acceptable level, which is the problem, realistically. It's everyone has different acceptable levels, but try to paint that picture of, we don't want anything acceptable. There's certain elements that risk are going to be there, but how can we ensure that it at least is minimized to the most acceptable level, which means yours and mine needs to be the same, and not putting my hand in the cement mixer or touching something hot, or whatever it is. And that's
part of having good processes in place, isn't it, in terms of things like JHA risk assessments, inspections. So actually there's a consistency in terms of not just approach but also thought. And like you say, I think it's a really important thing to recognize is we can't get rid of every hazard. We can't eliminate everything. It's just the nature of the beast that some jobs we're going to have some kind of hazards present. But like you say, how do we do our best to protect people and make sure they do things as safely as possible? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's they are really, hazards can be clingers. They really can. They're not, sometimes they're just they're gonna stick to you even when you don't want them to. So how can you ensure that if they are there, they are not exposed? And that's, I think that's the $1 million question or so, if you want to say. And that's why hopefully everyone has put in their processes to try to eliminate them, or at least keep them, minimal, because we get so caught up on. And I think we've done a good job. You look at incident rates; they've all, for the most part, they've kind of plateaued a little bit, but they've gone down here and there. So that says we've done a lot of good. We've done a lot right. But we see critical and SIFs and others, fatalities and such, they haven't. And that's when you start realizing why. What is happening? Have we focused so much on a general trip that we overlooked the serious fall from height, or whatever. And I think that's where we have to realize, how can we transition to actually looking at what exists, and it's a changing of the way we actually think, what metrics we want. I mean, we can go down a rabbit hole here, but there's a lot of transitioning to, really, it is a little bit of change management. Honestly, it has to take part.
I think on that point, I think regardless of the numbers, Langdon, we're still hurting people. We're still killing people in the US and the UK. And as we say, that's not acceptable. And there are lots of reasons why, I would suggest. And we're not going to deal with it in the next however many minutes we've got left to talk today. But actually, there are lots of things we need to think about. So all the things we've talked about, leadership, and we've talked about engagement, we've got to focus on that awareness piece. And I think one of the things when you're talking about risk and awareness is actually who's doing the risk assessments. So actually, who's going out and doing the JHA, who's going out and doing the risk assessment, who's looking at the safe operating procedure, and actually including the right people and more people in the creation of those documents, so that they've got that awareness of what's going on around them.
And not just creating it and then having them review it. And that's, I think, what we get. I mean,
that's the problem.
I've done that before. I've created a JHA. I used the one who was doing the job. We talked, got better understanding, maybe one other supervisor. But how many times have we actually incorporated multiple people? So then when I got done, it was, here's the JHA. Go take a look. This is what we put together. But I think that's a great point you bring up.
And I think following sort of the continuation of that point is, okay, we hand them that JHA, Langdon. How do we know they've actually read it and understood it? And I think I've said it before. I've been asked so many times, can we have the ability to have some kind of digital signature? And I just laugh, because I say, what does a digital signature tell you? It tells you that you physically handed them a JHA. It doesn't tell you any more, does it?
It tells you that I signed something.
Yeah, it tells you I've physically handed you a JHA and you've signed something. Yeah, and I think that's where we sometimes go wrong. And I think that's one of the challenges still for 2023, is that how do we get more people involved in the actual activities of health and safety, the creation of those kind of documents, so actually they own it. Make them own it, rather than you owning it and trying to then get the information across to them. Yeah. So I think that's one of the changes that we can be thinking about. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that honestly is probably a pretty good way to even close out this podcast, thinking about changing our thinking.
See how neatly I did that without even trying.
I mean, honestly, that's pretty good, because that's what it is, realistically. We talk about it. We've heard earlier podcasts where we've talked about it. I mean, it's not really groundbreaking stuff, even if we would like it to be for us. It's not. It's changing the way we've done things. How many times, I know you and I've talked about it numerous times, have I done things as healthy and safe as possible on the job, ensuring others are doing that as a safety professional, and then I go home and I cut corners myself.
Well, I've just told you, I stood and watched the guy stick his hand in the cement mixer. So,
I
Yeah.
jumped off a ladder a couple weeks ago, knowing I'm fine. I was like 3 or 4 rungs up, and I was holding something in my hand. Thank goodness it was like a wreath, so it wasn't anything big. I wasn't gonna cut myself, but I was on grass also. So I should say, but how many times have we done little things like that? So when we think about why does it matter and how can we change our thinking? Well, first off, it, safety is safety is safety wherever I am, and as we close out thinking about true safe operations, and that is one of our focuses for 2023, it's very much understanding that safe operations, they're ingrained in all elements. So when we talk about changing thinking, that's pretty much across the board. We know we've always done things one way, but that doesn't mean that that's the right way.
All elements and all people. So, and I think that's one of the things that we'll keep banging the drum about is actually get more people involved. Yeah, all too often you see these small, dedicated teams of health and safety people trying to do it themselves. And what we've got to do is got to spread the love, haven't we, Langdon? We've got to get more people doing more things, and then that way they've got that ownership, they've got that engagement and empowerment. Yeah. Okay. Do you see how many buzzwords? I managed to get 3 buzzwords into one sentence then. That was quite
And I don't
impressive.
even know that I talked about camaraderie once
You haven't. That's the
until
first
right
time
now.
today. Yeah.
Until right now. Well, for everyone, we appreciate you joining. And as we go forward, as we start the new year, we hope you all have a happy new year and also change the way you're thinking. Let's be safe out there, everyone.
Have a great time, everybody.
Hey everyone, really appreciate you tuning into this episode of Two Bald Guys Talking Safety. Please follow and subscribe to wherever you stream your favorite podcast or visit us at evochicks.com.
And if you want to see how follically challenged we really are, come and check us out on YouTube. If you've got value from the podcast, please go to Apple Podcasts, and in the review section of this podcast, if you could leave us a review or a rating, that would be great.
And as always, everyone, while you're going about your days and about your normal lives, stay safe out there and watch each other's back.